It started with a knock at the door. Not the regular, everyday kind where the mailman drops off a package or the neighbor needs sugar. No, this one was deliberate. 3 heavy knocks, evenly spaced, like something out of a suspense movie. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at 9 at night. Emily, my wife, was upstairs putting the kids to bed. I had just poured myself a glass of bourbon, the kind you save for Friday nights after a long week, and was about to sink into the couch when those knocks came. "Coming!" I called out, more annoyed than curious. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with a man I'd never seen before. Tall, mid-40s, with the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd except for his eyes. Those I'd remember. They were cold, calculating. Like he was sizing me up for a fight he'd already decided he'd win. "Can I help you?" I asked, my grip tightening on the edge of the door. He didn't look dangerous, but there was something about him that made my skin crawl. "You're Daniel, right?" he said, his voice calm but with an edge, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Yeah. Who's asking?" "I need to talk to you about Emily." That was enough to get my heart racing. I glanced up the stairs, half expecting her to appear, but the house was silent. Just me and this guy. "Look, I don't know who you are, but..." "She didn't tell you about me, did she?" He gave a small, almost pitying smile. I figured. My stomach dropped. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, but I forced myself to stand firm. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, just enough to make me uncomfortable but not enough for me to slam the door in his face. "My name's Ryan. Your wife and I have been seeing each other for 6 months." It felt like the words didn't even register at first. Like they bounced off some invisible wall in my head because they were too absurd to absorb. 6 months? Seeing each other? What the hell was this guy talking about? "Listen, buddy," I said, my voice shaking now, "if this is some kind of joke." "It's not," he cut me off. "And before you slam the door in my face, hear me out. I don't want trouble. I didn't even want to come here. But Emily's been lying to you, to me, to both of us. And I'm done being played." That stopped me cold. Played? What the hell did that even mean? Ryan reached into his pocket, and I stepped back instinctively, my fists clenched. But all he pulled out was his phone. "Look," he said, swiping through it. "You don't have to take my word for it." And then he held the screen up for me to see. It wasn't the kind of proof I was expecting, texts or pictures or some other cliché. No, it was a video. A short clip of Emily, laughing and leaning into him, her hand on his chest. She looked happy. Relaxed. The kind of look I hadn't seen on her face in months. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that screen. It could have been 10 seconds, or it could have been an hour. All I knew was that my world had just shifted in a way I couldn't fully comprehend yet. Ryan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I'm sorry, man," he said, and for a moment, he actually sounded like he meant it. "I just thought you should know." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the doorway, clutching the frame like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That was the moment everything began to unravel. I stood there for a long time, the door half open, the night air creeping into the house. My mind was stuck, unable to process what had just happened. Ryan. Who the hell was Ryan? And how did he fit into my life? Into Emily's life? The noise from upstairs snapped me back. The sound of Lily's soft laugh and Emily's voice, sweet and soothing, coaxing Josh into bed. It felt so normal, so right. Yet, standing there, holding the edge of the door, I realized how wrong everything must have been for months, maybe longer. I closed the door quietly and locked it. My bourbon sat untouched on the table as I sat on the couch, hands pressed to my knees. I needed to think. I needed clarity. But most of all, I needed proof. Ryan could have been a liar, some lunatic trying to stir up trouble for reasons I couldn't fathom. Or he could have been telling the truth. Either way, I wasn't going to confront Emily without knowing for sure. Her footsteps pattered down the stairs moments later. "They're out like lights," she said, walking into the living room. She looked beautiful, like she always did when she was in mom mode, hair tied back, wearing one of my old college t-shirts. She gave me a warm smile, one I'd fallen for over a decade ago. "What are you doing just sitting there? Long day?" I managed a nod. "Yeah. Long day." She walked over, her hand brushing my shoulder, and leaned down to kiss me on the cheek. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm gonna turn in early." She watched me for a moment, her expression softening. "All right," she said, her tone almost concerned. "Don't work too hard tomorrow." I nodded again and went upstairs, closing the bedroom door behind me. I felt like I was moving on autopilot. My body didn't feel like my own. Lying to her felt wrong, but I couldn't just let it go. I had to know the truth. The next few days were unbearable. Every time Emily smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodbye before work, I replayed Ryan's words in my head, "Your wife and I have been seeing each other for 6 months." I didn't sleep much. When I did, I woke up in a cold sweat, my chest tight. I started noticing things I hadn't before: her texts, the way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, how she seemed just a little too cheerful when she mentioned work. I wasn't paranoid, I was hyper-aware, like my brain was rewiring itself to catch the details I'd ignored before. Friday came, and with it, another one of her work trips. Milwaukee again. A full weekend. Normally, I'd kiss her goodbye, wish her luck, and settle into the chaos of watching the kids. This time, I had other plans. She left early that morning, her bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll call you tonight," she said, leaning in for a kiss. Her lips felt warm but distant, like she was already somewhere else. "Safe travels," I told her, my tone as neutral as I could manage. As soon as she was out the door, I swung into action. I'd already done my homework. The night Ryan showed up, I'd spent hours digging her email, her texts, her calendar. There wasn't much, just a few vague appointments and travel confirmations. Nothing suspicious. But I wasn't giving up. I called my brother-in-law, Mike, who owed me a favor after I helped him move last year. "Hey, can you watch the kids for the weekend?" I asked. He grumbled a bit, Mike always did, but eventually agreed. "What's going on?" "Work emergency," I lied. "I'll pick them up Sunday night." With the kids squared away, I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove to Milwaukee. The plan was simple: find out where she was staying, see who she was with, and gather enough evidence to either confirm or disprove Ryan's story. It didn't take long to find her. Emily always stayed at the same hotel for her trips, the Oakwood Plaza downtown. I parked a block away and sat in my car, watching the entrance like some kind of amateur detective. I hated myself for it, for stooping to this level, but I couldn't stop. I needed answers. She arrived around 4 p.m., stepping out of a cab with her overnight bag. Alone. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe Ryan was lying. Maybe she really was here for work. But then, as I watched, a man approached her, a man I recognized. It was Ryan. He walked up to her with the casual ease of someone who'd done it 100 times before. She smiled at him, that same warm smile she used to give me. They didn't kiss, didn't even touch, but the way they stood so close, the way she leaned toward him as he spoke, it was enough. My stomach churned, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I waited until they went inside before getting out of the car. I didn't follow them immediately, I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I took out my phone and called the hotel, pretending to be her colleague. "Hi, I'm supposed to meet Emily Carter," I said. "Could you confirm her room number?" The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out that information." "Of course, I understand," I said, trying to sound apologetic. "Could you at least connect me to her room?" A moment of silence, then, "One moment, please." I hung up before they could connect the call. I didn't need to talk to her, I just needed to know where she was. Room 814. I took the elevator up to the 8th floor, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't have a plan, not really. Confronting her now seemed reckless, but I couldn't just leave. I needed more. Standing outside her room, I pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't hear much, just muffled voices, but it was enough to confirm she wasn't alone. My mind raced, 1,000 emotions crashing into each other: anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could she do this to me? To us? I pulled my phone out and started recording, capturing the sound of their voices. It wasn't much, but it was proof. Proof that Ryan wasn't lying. Proof that my wife, the woman I'd built my life with, was hiding something from me. By the time I left the hotel, it was dark. I drove back to my motel on the outskirts of the city, my hands shaking the whole way. I couldn't go back to Chicago yet. Not without a plan. Not without knowing what I was going to say to her when she came home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the recording on my phone. It felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. But it wasn't. It was happening to me. And I had no idea what to do next. Sunday evening arrived with an almost suffocating weight. I'd spent 2 days in that dingy motel room in Milwaukee, turning over the same thoughts, replaying the recording on my phone, and trying to convince myself this wasn't my reality. But it was. The video I'd taken of Ryan and Emily at the hotel entrance played on a loop in my mind. I had evidence, but what was I supposed to do with it? Confront her outright? Wait for her to admit it? No, I couldn't wait. I didn't trust her enough to hope she'd confess without being cornered. By 6 p.m., I was back in Chicago, parked a block away from our house. Emily's car wasn't in the driveway yet. My heart raced as I considered how to handle the moment she walked in. I hadn't planned any dramatic speech. I didn't have any rehearsed lines. All I had was anger, betrayal, and a need for the truth. Around 6:30 p.m., her car pulled in. I watched her through the window as she grabbed her bag from the back seat and walked up to the door. She looked calm, the picture of a woman who'd had a productive, uneventful weekend. The door opened, and she called out, "I'm home," like she always did. I stood in the kitchen, waiting. "Kids are still at Mike's," I said, stepping into her view. She looked surprised. "You're here? I thought you'd pick them up by now. I thought we needed to talk first." The shift in her expression was subtle, but I caught it. A flicker of nervousness crossed her face before she composed herself. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You tell me." She set her bag down and crossed her arms, leaning casually against the counter. "Daniel, what's going on? You're acting weird." I pulled out my phone and tapped on the screen, playing the recording of her and Ryan's voices from the hotel. It wasn't loud or clear, but it was unmistakably her voice laughing, his voice responding. Her face paled as she heard it. "What is this?" she asked, her tone defensive. "You tell me," I snapped. "That's you, isn't it? And Ryan." Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, she looked like she was about to deny it. But then she sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're trying to accuse me of." "Cut the crap, Emily." I slammed my hand on the counter, making her jump. "I was there. I saw you. Milwaukee. The Oakwood Plaza. Room 814. Do you want me to keep going?" Her eyes widened, and her face turned red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "You followed me," she hissed. "Are you serious right now?" "Don't try to flip this around on me," I shot back. "You lied to me. You've been lying to me. So, why don't you start talking before I lose whatever patience I have left?" Emily ran a hand through her hair, her lips pressing into a tight line. She looked cornered, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. "It's not what you think," she said finally, her voice quieter. "Oh, really? So, Ryan showing up at my door wasn't what I thought, either? Or you meeting him at a hotel? Go ahead, Emily. Enlighten me." Her gaze darted away, but she forced herself to look back at me. "It's complicated. No, it's not, I said, my voice cold. It's really simple. You either cheated on me, or you didn't. Which is it? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. We didn't, she began, but I cut her off. Don't even try to deny it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not this time. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered. It started out as just talking. Venting about work, about life. It wasn't serious. I didn't mean for it to. To what? To destroy our marriage? I barked. Because that's what you've done, Emily. It didn't mean anything, she said, her voice rising. It was stupid, okay? A mistake. I didn't sleep with him. I swear. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. You expect me to believe that? After 6 months? After seeing the way you looked at him? She took a step closer, her hands outstretched, pleading. I'm telling the truth, Daniel. I know it looks bad, but I didn't cross that line. Please, you have to believe me. You crossed the line the moment you let him into your life, I said, stepping back from her. Whether you slept with him or not doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me. Emily wiped at her face, her tears falling freely now. I didn't want this to happen. I love you, Daniel. I love our family. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said, my voice hard. You wouldn't have lied to me for months. You wouldn't have snuck around behind my back. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, she said. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, the woman I'd spent over a decade building a life with, and felt nothing but anger and pain. It's a little late for that, don't you think? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. I need time, I said firmly. I need space. Don't talk to me about fixing this right now. Just, give me time. Emily nodded reluctantly, wiping at her face again. Okay, she whispered. I'll give you time. But please, Daniel, don't shut me out completely. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I walked past her, out of the kitchen, and up the stairs to the guest room, closing the door behind me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. I'd gotten the confrontation I wanted, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a wound that would never heal. When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I was living in someone else's skin. The bed in the guest room was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, but that wasn't what kept me awake most of the night. It was the weight of everything that had happened. The lies. The betrayal. The fact that the woman I had trusted with my life had systematically torn it apart while pretending everything was fine. Emily was already up when I went downstairs. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at me like she wanted to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I poured myself a cup, ignored the tension hanging in the air, and left for work without a word. At the office, I couldn't focus. My team asked me questions, deadlines loomed, but I couldn't shake the gnawing anger inside me. Every time I thought about her standing there, lying to my face, I wanted to scream. But screaming wouldn't fix anything. Neither would crying, pleading, or any other emotional display. I needed to act. That night, while Emily was upstairs reading to the kids, I made my first move. Her laptop sat on the counter, and while she wasn't looking, I opened it. I knew her password, she'd never bothered to change it in all these years. Her inbox popped up, and I scrolled through it, my stomach twisting with every email. Most were work-related, but buried among them were messages from Ryan. The emails weren't explicit, but they were intimate in a way that made my blood boil. He called her Em, told her he missed her, said he couldn't wait to see her again. She responded with careful, calculated replies, the kind you send when you're trying to hide something. The most recent email was from the night she got back. He'd written, "Let me know how things went with him." It was enough. Enough to confirm that their relationship went far beyond what she'd admitted. Enough to convince me I needed to destroy whatever connection they had left. I forwarded the emails to myself, then deleted the forwarded messages from her sent folder so she wouldn't notice. After that, I started digging deeper. Bank accounts, credit cards, shared finances. I wanted to know if she'd spent money on him, on hotel rooms, on anything that could strengthen my case. Over the next few days, I pieced together a pattern. Charges at restaurants she'd never mentioned, transactions from Milwaukee that didn't match her company's per diem policy. And then there was the gift, a purchase from an upscale men's clothing store, made 2 months ago, on a weekend she claimed to be home. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was livid. And I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I reached out to an attorney, one of the best in the city. I explained the situation, provided the evidence I'd gathered, and asked what my options were. He listened carefully, then gave me a plan. Divorce was inevitable, but how it played out would depend on what I wanted. Did I want to walk away quietly, or did I want to go scorched earth? The answer was obvious. The first step was to ensure the kids wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. I didn't want them to suffer because of Emily's actions, so I arranged for them to spend the weekend at my parents' house. Emily didn't question it when I suggested it. She probably thought I was trying to cool off, which worked to my advantage. Once the kids were gone, I set the rest of the plan into motion. I started with Ryan. I had his email address from the forwarded messages and his number from an online directory search. I sent him a simple email: "I know everything. Stay away from my family." He didn't reply, but I knew he'd read it. Next, I contacted Emily's boss. I framed it carefully, attaching the emails and evidence of her misuse of company funds for personal expenses. I wasn't vindictive about it. This wasn't about ruining her career. It was about ensuring she couldn't use work as an excuse to sneak around anymore. Finally, I printed every piece of evidence I had: emails, receipts, everything, and put them in a folder labeled for discussion. Then I waited. Emily came home that evening, her expression guarded. "Where are the kids?" she asked. "With my parents," I said, sitting at the dining table. The folder was in front of me, closed but conspicuous. Her eyes flicked to it, and she swallowed hard. "What's that?" "Sit down," I said. She hesitated, then pulled out a chair across from me. "What's going on, Daniel?" I slid the folder across the table. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. She didn't say a word, but her face said everything. The emails. The receipts. The gift. It was all there, laid out in black and white. "This is everything I've found so far," I said, my voice calm. "I'm sure there's more, but I've seen enough to know what kind of person you've become." "Daniel," she started, but I held up a hand. Don't try to explain, don't try to justify it, and don't insult me by pretending you didn't do this." She closed the folder, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I want you to pack your things and leave." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "You're kicking me out?" "I've already filed for divorce," I said, sliding another piece of paper across the table. "And I'll be fighting for full custody of the kids. You don't deserve them after what you've done." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she nodded, defeated. "I'll go," she whispered. "Good." She left that night, taking only what she could fit in a suitcase. As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. The house was silent. For the first time in years, it felt empty in a way that made my skin crawl. Emily's things were gone, or at least most of them. The kids were still with my parents, and I told them they could stay a bit longer until I figured out how to explain everything without destroying their world. The silence gave me too much time to think, and I hated it. Emily reached out a few days later. She called first, but I ignored her. Then came the texts, short at first, asking if we could talk, but they quickly grew more frantic when I didn't reply. By the third day, she showed up at the house. I heard her car pull into the driveway before she even rang the bell. I didn't want to let her in, but avoiding her forever wasn't an option. The kids would need answers eventually, and I needed to figure out what the hell the next step looked like. When I opened the door, she stood there, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair tied back in a messy knot like she hadn't slept in days. Good, I thought. She didn't deserve to feel okay. Can I come in? She asked, her voice trembling. I stepped aside without a word, and she walked into the living room. She glanced around like she didn't recognize the place anymore, then turned to face me. Thank you for seeing me, she said. Say what you came to say, I replied, crossing my arms. I didn't sit down. I didn't offer her a seat. This wasn't a reunion. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her wedding ring. I noticed she was still wearing it. I wasn't. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to hear me out. I've already heard enough, I said coldly. You lied. You cheated. You destroyed everything we built together. What else is there to say? She winced at my words, but I didn't care. She deserved worse. I know I screwed up, she said, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But Daniel, I swear, I never stopped loving you. I let out a bitter laugh. You have a funny way of showing it. I mean it, she insisted, stepping closer. What I did, it wasn't about you. It wasn't because I didn't love you. I was just. Spare me the excuses, I interrupted. You weren't just anything. You made choices. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me. And now you want to stand here and pretend you're the victim? Save it. She blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm trying to explain. I felt lost. Like I wasn't myself anymore. And Ryan. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't say his name. Not in my house. She fell silent, biting her lip. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears away. I'm sorry, she said finally. For everything. I know that doesn't fix it, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done, I said. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I wasted trusting you. It doesn't fix what this will do to the kids. She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping. I want to make things right. I stared at her, incredulous. You think you can make this right? You think there's some magic fix for what you did? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I want to try. I want to fight for us. There is no us, I said, my tone flat. Not anymore. Her breath hitched, and she looked like I'd just slapped her. Please, she whispered. Don't give up on me. Don't give up on our family. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to yell. You gave up on this family the moment you let him into your life, I said. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about the kids. You thought about yourself. And now you're sorry because you got caught. That's not true, she cried. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was confused, and I made a mistake. But I'm here now, trying to fix it. It's too late, Emily, I said. You can't fix this. I can't trust you. And without trust, there's nothing left. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. What about the kids? She asked, her voice muffled. Are you going to take them away from me? I'm going to do what's best for them, I said. And that might mean limiting your involvement. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. You can't do that. They need their mother. They needed a mother who cared enough about her family not to blow it up, I shot back. You should have thought about them before you started sneaking around. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't feel pity. I felt exhausted. I'm filing for sole custody, I said. You can fight me if you want, but I have the evidence, and you know it. She nodded slowly, her face crumpling. You don't have to punish me like this. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about consequences. Something you should have thought about before you decided your feelings were more important than your family. She didn't respond. She just sat there, broken, as I walked to the door and opened it. You should go, I said. She stood slowly, her legs shaky, and walked to the door. As she stepped outside, she turned to face me one last time. I know you hate me, she said, her voice trembling. And I deserve it. But I'll never stop trying to make up for what I've done. I didn't reply. I closed the door, locking it behind her. Then I leaned against it, taking a deep breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small measure of control. Emily was out of the house, and soon, she'd be out of my life for good. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave me the smallest glimmer of something I hadn't felt in days: relief. The house felt different after she left for good. Not better, not worse, just different. It was quieter, which was a relief in some ways and unbearable in others. I picked up the kids from my parents' place that evening, trying to mask the tension I knew was hanging on me like a shadow. They were full of stories about their weekend with Grandpa and Grandma, completely unaware of the storm their parents had just lived through. The ride home was uneventful, but as I pulled into the driveway, Josh asked, "Where's Mom's car?" I froze for half a second but quickly recovered. "She's staying with a friend for a little while," I said, keeping my tone light. She needed some time to herself. "Is she okay?" Lily piped up from the back seat. "She's fine," I replied, forcing a smile in the rearview mirror. "She'll talk to you soon. Don't worry." They seemed to accept that for the moment, though I could tell Josh wasn't entirely convinced. He was old enough to sense when something was off, even if he didn't fully understand it. Lily, on the other hand, just nodded and went back to looking out the window. Once inside, the house was no longer silent. It was filled with the chatter of kids, the sound of them unpacking their bags, and the TV in the living room playing one of their favorite cartoons. I busied myself with dinner, grateful for the distraction. The chaos of parenting left little room for overthinking, which was exactly what I needed. After they were in bed, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the glass of water in front of me. My phone buzzed. Emily again. I didn't bother looking at the message. She'd sent at least 10 that day, all variations of the same thing: apologies, pleased to talk, promises to make things right. I didn't respond to any of them. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be. The next day, I met with my lawyer again to finalize the paperwork. Filing for sole custody was a heavy decision, but it wasn't one I'd made lightly. I didn't want to punish Emily, despite what she might think. I wanted to protect the kids from any more instability. They deserved better than being caught in the middle of a war zone. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I communicated only through lawyers. She pushed back on the custody arrangement, but not as hard as I expected. I think she knew she didn't have much of a case. Her actions over the past few months spoke louder than any defense she could mount. Still, it was exhausting. Every email, every phone call from her attorney was a reminder of what had been lost. The kids asked about her frequently, and I did my best to keep my answers neutral. "She's doing okay," I'd tell them. "She loves you and misses you." It wasn't a lie, at least not entirely. She did love them, as far as I could tell. But love wasn't enough to erase the damage she'd done. One evening, a month after she'd left, Emily asked to see the kids. It was the first direct message she'd sent in weeks, and I debated whether to respond. I finally agreed, under strict conditions, a supervised visit, at a neutral location, with no discussion of the divorce or custody. She agreed without argument. The meeting took place at a park near our house. Josh and Lily were thrilled to see her, running into her arms the moment she arrived. She hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered how much she loved them. I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. It was painful to witness, but also necessary. They needed their mother, even if I no longer trusted her. Emily kept to the rules, focusing entirely on the kids and steering clear of any mention of our situation. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like we were just two parents watching their children play. But the illusion shattered every time our eyes met. The weight of everything unspoken hung between us like a wall. After the visit, Josh asked, "Is Mom coming home soon?" I crouched down to his level, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not right now, buddy," I said gently. "But she loves you very much, and she's going to see you again soon." "Why can't she come back?" he pressed, his voice small. "It's complicated," I said. "But it's not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Lily, thankfully, seemed content just knowing she'd seen her mom. But Josh was old enough to know when something didn't add up. That night, after they were asleep, I sat down and wrote Emily an email. It wasn't long, but it was direct. I told her that while I wasn't ready to forgive her, I wouldn't stand in the way of her relationship with the kids. They needed stability, and part of that meant having her in their lives, even if only in a limited capacity. I also told her that any communication between us would remain strictly about the children. Personal matters were off the table. Her response came the next day. It was brief, but heartfelt. She thanked me for giving her the chance to stay in their lives and promised to respect my boundaries. It was the most civil exchange we'd had since the whole ordeal began. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The custody agreement gave me primary care of the kids, with Emily allowed supervised visits twice a month. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. Life didn't magically get easier after that. There were still hard days when the anger and sadness threatened to overwhelm me. But there were good days, too. Days when Josh nailed a three-pointer at his basketball game, or Lily proudly showed me a new drawing she'd made. Those were the moments that reminded me why I had to keep moving forward. As for Emily, she stayed in the picture, though always at arm's length. She seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding her relationship with the kids, and I gave her credit for that. But I never let her back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Looking back, I've learned more about myself in the past few months than I had in years. I learned that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. I learned that people can surprise you, both in the best and worst ways. And I learned that even in the face of betrayal, it's possible to pick up the pieces and build something new. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I have now. And for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. What do you think about this story? Can betrayal be forgiven, or is it always the end of a relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion matters and might support someone else. And don't forget to like the video if you like this story.